Hey guys, welcome back. In this episode, we'll be putting together the Fox Alien Master, the Fox Alien 4040 CNC.
I'm just going to go ahead and open this. Package pretty well. This out. Yes. All right, so it looks like we have a manual to start with. And then I have some waste boards with pre-installed threaded inserts. Yeah, two-piece waste board. So we'll set that off to the side for now and keep on going. Hardware bin. Looks like it's all labeled on top here with the size and quantity for each of the different little sections. It's nice. Not a bunch of bags full of hardware this time. Let's see if this whole section just comes out. Oh, perfect. So it looks like we have some different sections down here all split up. We'll just go ahead and get rid of this box for now. So the first thing we want to do is go through and verify that all of our components are here based on the packing list in here with the manual. Looks like we have a 12-month warranty as well. So now that all of these foam inserts are out of the box, I can go ahead and pull out this packing slip and verify that all the components are present to begin this build. So it looks like all of our parts are here. That's great. As you can see here, this model is going to use a series of Nema 17 motors, these little ones. The larger 4040 𝐂𝐸 uses the Nema 23s. This is a smaller version spindle, so it includes smaller steppers as well for a more economical solution. Our first step in the assembly of the frame is to take the extruded aluminum X rails and mount them to the pre-assembled Y rails that already have these steppers and belts installed. So the Y1 goes over here on the left side, and the Y2 on the right. Now that motor does want to tip over from the weight of the motor, so I'm going to go ahead and set that box underneath it right there. And the bits actually work well to hold this side from tipping over as well. So then we'll just go ahead and take our acrylic sheets and the assigned bolts in here and begin the installation. Now again, each one of these bolts you're going to want to put in here lightly just to get the thread started and not over tighten them. "16 spring washers, 16 regular standard washers, 16 and 20 millimeter bolts to attach these together. Now, what you want to do is place the spring washer on the screw first, followed by the standard washer. And I'll go ahead and do that to all of these real quick and just have them preloaded and set ready to use. So for each of these end pieces, we're going to go ahead and pre-install these screws with 3 long ones and 2 short ones right in here. And then if I'm careful, I can get them all in place. So there's one with the screws loosely installed. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process on the other 3 brackets as well. If putting all those screws in at once is giving you trouble, you could do them one at a time, starting with the top screw and working down is usually the easiest way to do this. Just installing them loosely like that, and then working your way around. Now it is the long one, 2 short ones, and then 2 more long ones at the bottom. Another way to look at this is the 2 slots in the top one are the long ones. And again, I'm just snugging these up and backing it off just a half a turn so that I can come back in a few moments, square up the frame, and then tighten these down. Because these are clean-cut aluminum rails, they tend to have a nice square end to begin with. So I'm just going to tighten them down and then check it for squareness instead of going through the whole process of verifying square first. As long as these are butted together properly, it should form a nice square frame. So now when it comes time to tighten these, you can kind of move this around for play. We might need to adjust that later once we put the gantry on as well. Now with the base frame assembled, our next step is to move on to the wasteboard. And of course, the inserts are going to go with that Allen portion down. Just going to fit the 2 of them on here. And we just need another 8 of these M5 by 20 bolts. Now down through this counterboard slot, we've got pre-threaded holes. Just as before, I'm going to go ahead and put all of these screws in loosely to make sure that everything lines up the way I want it to. Try and center these a bit better than they currently are. And then tighten down these screws. Now our next step is to add the gantry on the top here. Now there's a few ways to do this. It does feel that we do have some good tension set on these. They're not too loose, even from the factory. Now you should be able to push each of these fairly easily with little resistance to them. So I have the X-axis here ready to install. I'll go ahead and grab the M5 by 12 bolts along with the spring washers and standard washers as well. That's 2 for each side, so a total of 4. Okay, just as before, I want to preload the washers onto my bolts here. Spring washer first, followed by the standard washer. Okay, now with those, we can go ahead and hold this in place. Passing the bolt through this side plate and into the threaded portion of it. And now one trick that I've used in the past is to use a smaller Allen wrench to line up one of the threaded holes like that. And that makes it a lot easier to get the other one in place and screw it in. Now I'm just going to cheat and leave that Allen in there while I go and do the other side. And that just makes aligning these bolt holes a little bit easier. Now with those two installed, I can kind of pivot it to get this third and then the fourth bolt installed. Now we are done with the Y and X axis. I do see that our end stops here kind of prevent it from getting full range of motion. So we might have to adjust those a little later to get just a slightly larger cutting surface. So our next step in the assembly procedure is to install the Z axis using 4 M5 by 10 bolts. So using these 4 bolts, how it goes on is these 4 through holes here align with these threaded holes in the acrylic plate. So to get this on, it might be a little easier to spin this lead screw shaft and get that motor a bit out of the way. Now we can go ahead and install the top 2 screws. I'm going to go ahead and put them in this way. Now a trick on these is to run the screw backwards for a partial turn, and that will help the threads align so you don't strip out the threads in the acrylic plates. So I'm going to go ahead and just push this down with a little bit of pressure, not a lot, but a little bit of pressure on here to align these up the way that they naturally want to go. We have to come back later and tram the spindle. That will be a whole different operation. But these are the screws to tram your spindle. Get that out of the way. So we are able to get these screws in here. I might have to lift this up a little bit. That's why you want to make sure to not tighten those top ones fully yet, because they can quite easily block these lower screws. So with these in, I am going to just kind of tap it a little bit and let gravity pull it down into place and just kind of snug them up a bit. Not too tight. Now with those bottom ones tight, I can come back in here and tighten the top. And now we can rotate the entire assembly around to get to the back side and start mounting the drag chain brackets. Now it's time for the 2 drag chain end brackets and 2 more M5 by 10 bolts. And they just go on through these acrylic brackets here. And again, since we're going to have to attach the larger bracket across this, I'm just snugging them up so that they kind of hold themselves in place without being too tight. And the next step is to install this X drag chain bracket facing outward, just like so, with 2 of these smaller M5 by 6 bolts. And then now you are going to want to torque these down. This actually adds some structural rigidity to this gantry as well. We are going to add the X-axis drag chain bracket as well, this little one here. So now with this bracket, it comes pre-installed with the screws and these rotating T-nuts. So we just kind of place it in here, right up against this edge. Make sure that the T-nuts do rotate. You can kind of see just through a crack here that this one here properly rotated. And that's going to give us a nice secure hold there. Anywhere you use T-nuts, those rotating ones, just watch out and make sure that they do properly rotate. Now for this next step, I'm just going to start with mounting the Y-axis drag chain and follow that with the X-axis drag chain as well. So the easy way to tell this works is the X-axis is going to have all the motor components on it for the spindle. So it's going to go this way. And the Y-axis portion has one that goes across to that side, one for this Y1 motor here, and then all of the rest of the components that are going to go back towards the controller board. All right, so with this just briefly held in place, I'm going to go ahead and use that same trick as before and drop in one of these Allen wrenches. And one more over here as well, so this one doesn't fall anywhere on me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and use these flathead cap screws to install all these drag chain components. They're just a little bit more lower profile, so none of the wires really rub on the heads of these screws. Go ahead and install the other end of this Y drag chain as well, right here. And then move on over to the X drag chain and install its 4 screws. So moving over to this one, I'm going to do the same process, install the first one loosely, come back, install the second one, and then tighten them both up. Nice and snug. I did see some zip ties in the package, so we might zip tie some of these up. And the last part of this drag chain is to install this piece here to the bracket right next to the X motor. All right, so all those screws for that drag chain installed. So now we're going to go ahead and mount the controller board. I've pre-installed the rotating T-nuts and the screws in there. And if you align these properly, the head of the screw that's back here will also be in line with this slot, and it will just fall into place in there and hold it pretty securely. So now it just comes down to plugging in all of these cables. With the connection process, there's a wonderful diagram in the menu with a few pictures that are also show all the colors of the tags. So I know for sure that the home switch goes right up in here. It's one of the tougher ones to get to in here. And you can kind of hear that positive locking of that clip on the connector in there. Because the 12-volt fan is already in place, so our next connection going from left to right is the E-stop right here. And you want to make sure you get that all the way in there so that clip engages, followed by the X limit switch. And then the Y limit switch. The Z limit switch. And then we have the probe connector here if you want to install the probe. I don't like that having, I don't like having that plugged in unless I'm using it usually. I'm going to go ahead and wait on that. Moving on to the top portion of this board here, we can go ahead from left to right again. The first connector we're actually going to skip. The second one is the 12-volt output for our spindle. The one after that is an optional laser connection, followed by the X-axis motor, which is yellow in color. Next is the Y2, and then the Y1, and finally the Z. Now over here on this side, we have a USB connector, and that's what's going to go into our computer. And then over here on the left-hand side, we also have the 12-volt input, which is going to come from that power supply that was included. So moving on to the rest of these drag chain wiring connections, we're going to go ahead and plug in these other motors over here. Starting with the Y1 stepper. And then the limit switches. Which do run off of a single connector. And that one's a little tough to get around this other direction. So I'm going to go ahead and run it right over here. It doesn't matter which one of these two you plug it into because they're just jumper together anyway. To get that tag out of the way, I'm just going to bring it back over here as well. Now the Y2 motor is going to use this cable here and run right along the bottom of this cable chain bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and snap that wire in place and show you that as well. and then plug this into the motor right over on this end. It looks like I don't have enough slack, so I'm going to pull just a little bit through that cable chain, leaving just enough slack over here to plug in the motor. And now we can plug in the Y2 motor, making sure that's in there securely. Now we only have the X axis right here and the Z to plug in. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the X axis motor right here, and then move underneath to the X axis limit switch. Now, just like the Y, it doesn't really matter which side we go to because they are jumpered together right there anyway. And there we go. We have that X-axis limit switch now connected. And now we can go ahead and plug in the Z motor. I'm going to go ahead and pull a little bit more slack out through here for these as well. And then the Z limit switch, which plugs into the side over here. And now this Z limit switch is going to plug in to the top connector right here. All right, and the final thing to install here is the spindle connections, which is just the plus and minus over here for this motor. And there we go. Everything is now connected. And the only things left to connect now after that Z-axis are the E-stop and homing switches. The home being the blue one on the bottom, followed by the E-stop directly above that. Okay, moving on to the next page here. That is all that we have left to do. Our next steps are installing the software. After that, we will install a bit and perform the test carbs from that USB thumb drive. So if that did help you in the assembly of your 𝐂𝐚𝐫𝐈EN 4040 CNC, go ahead and hit the like button to let me know, and make sure you check out this video next.